John Tyler was the 10th President of the United States. The son of a Virginia governor, Tyler had already been a member of the House of Delegates and the Council of State before being elected to Congress in 1816. After serving as governor of Virginia, the Assembly elected him to the United States Senate. A slaveholder and Democrat, he supported states' rights and limited government. He broke with Andrew Jackson early in the 1830s over what he viewed as an alarming increase in federal power. Tyler joined the Whig Party and won the vice presidency in 1840 on a ticket with William Henry Harrison. Following Harrison's death in April 1841, Tyler became the first vice president to assume office after the death of the chief executive. His support of states' rights clashed with his party's prevailing belief in a stronger government, nearly causing the collapse of his administration. Tyler found some success in foreign affairs, but he left the White House in 1845 unpopular and expelled from the Whig Party. As the secession crisis intensified early in 1861, Tyler presided over the ill-fated peace conference to head off armed conflict. He served as a delegate to the Virginia Convention that addressed the state's response to the crisis, ultimately voting for secession in April 1861. The following November Tyler won election to the Confederate House of Representatives, but died before his term began. John Tyler was an American politician who served as the 10th President of the United States from 1841 to 1845, after briefly holding office as the 10th Vice President in 1841. He was elected Vice President on the 1840 Whig ticket with President William Henry Harrison, succeeding to the presidency following Harrison's death 31 days after assuming office. Tyler was a stalwart supporter and advocate of states' rights, including regarding slavery, and he adopted nationalistic policies as president only when they did not infringe on the state's powers. His unexpected rise to the presidency posed a threat to the presidential ambitions of Henry Clay and other Whig politicians and left Tyler estranged from both of the nation's major political parties at the time. Tyler was born into a prominent slave-holding Virginia family. He became a national figure at a time of political upheaval. In the 1820s, the Democratic-Republican Party, at the time the nation's only political party, split into several factions. Initially a Democrat, Tyler opposed President Andrew Jackson during the nullification crisis as he saw Jackson's actions as infringing on states' rights and criticized Jackson's expansion of executive power during the Bank War. This led Tyler to ally with the Whig Party. He served as a Virginia state legislator and governor, U.S. representative, and U.S. senator. Tyler was a regional Whig vice presidential nominee in the 1836 presidential election. They lost. He was the sole nominee on the 1840 Whig presidential ticket as William Henry Harrison's running mate. Under the campaign slogan Tippecanoe and Tyler too, the Harrison-Tyler ticket defeated incumbent President Martin Van Buren. President Harrison died just 1 month after taking office, and Tyler became the first vice president to succeed to the presidency. Amid uncertainty as to whether a vice president succeeded a deceased president, or merely took on his duties, Tyler immediately took the presidential oath of office, setting a lasting precedent. He signed into law some of the Whig-controlled Congress's bills, but he was a strict constructionist and vetoed the party's bills to create a national bank and raise tariff rates. He believed that the president, rather than Congress, should set policy, and he sought to bypass the Whig establishment led by Senator Henry Clay. Most of Tyler's cabinet resigned shortly into his term and the Whigs expelled him from the party, dubbing him his accidency. Tyler was the first president to have his veto of legislation overridden by Congress. He faced a stalemate on domestic policy, although he had several foreign policy achievements, including the Webster-Ashburton Treaty with Britain and the Treaty of Wanghia with China. Tyler firmly believed in manifest destiny and saw the annexation of Texas as economically advantageous to the United States, signing a bill to offer Texas statehood just before leaving office and returning to his plantation. When the American Civil War began in 1861, Tyler at first supported the peace conference. When it failed, he sided with the Confederacy. He presided over the opening of the Virginia Secession Convention and served as a member of the Provisional Congress of the Confederate States. Tyler subsequently won election to the Confederate House of Representatives but died before it assembled. Some scholars have praised Tyler's political resolve, but historians have generally given his presidency a low ranking. Tyler did make progress in combining the American and British navies to stop oceanic African slave trafficking under the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. That treaty also peacefully settled the border between Maine and Canada. Today, Tyler is seldom remembered in comparison to other presidents and maintains only a limited presence in American cultural memory. Born to an affluent family on March 29, 1790, John Tyler spent most of his life in Charles City County, Virginia. He was raised on the Tyler family plantation, Greenway, and lived there until he attended the College of William and Mary, graduating in 1807. He then prepared for a career in law, studying with his father John Tyler, Sr., and Edmund Randolph, former United States Attorney General. After marrying Letitia Christian in 1813, John purchased a tract of land in Charles City County and built his own plantation, Woodburn, shortly thereafter. According to the 1820 census, there were 24 enslaved people living at Woodburn with the Tylers, some of whom were inherited from his father's estate. 10 years later, the Tyler household had grown exponentially from 3 to 7 children, ranging in age from 15-year-old Mary to newborn Tazewell. The enslaved community had grown as well, 29 individuals, and more than half were under the age of 10. Throughout the 1820s and 1830s, Tyler held a series of prominent political positions at both the state and national level. While he considered himself a Democrat, he sometimes opposed President Andrew Jackson's policies, specifically whenever the president opted to use executive power at the expense of the states. In 1839, the Whig Party nominated William Henry Harrison for president. Tyler, a Virginian slave owner and lifelong Democrat, was added to the ticket to entice Southerners to vote for Harrison, who soundly defeated President Van Buren. Tippecanoe and Tyler too became the oft-repeated slogan of their supporters, but this relationship changed dramatically after the unexpected death of President Harrison on April 4, 1841. Vice President Tyler took the oath of office with Harrison's cabinet present and assumed all presidential authority immediately, but the new president quickly found himself at odds with leaders in the Whig Party. His veto of legislation that would revive the Second Bank of the United States sparked a visceral reaction from both politicians and citizens alike. The Whig Party cast Tyler out and most of his cabinet resigned over this episode. At the same time, his Democratic friends no longer trusted him. Considering the political turmoil that engulfed his presidency, his detractors had also successfully nicknamed him His Accidency. It was hardly surprising when neither party selected Tyler to be its presidential nominee in 1848. A few days before leaving office, Tyler signed legislation to annex Texas, an expansionist policy goal he had pursued since becoming president and probably his most notable achievement. In 1842, Tyler suffered the loss of his beloved wife Letitia to a stroke. Over the course of 3 decades of marriage, the couple had raised 8 children. 2 years later, the president married Julia Gardner in New York. After leaving the White House, they retired to Sherwood Plantation in Charles City County, Virginia, where they had 7 children together. On the eve of the Civil War, former President Tyler served as a representative at the Peace Conference of 1861 but ultimately rejected the proposed resolutions. He would go on to serve as an elected representative for the Confederacy, but he did not live to see the end of the war. On January 18, 1862, he died in Richmond, Virginia at age 71. While he had requested a simple burial, political leaders of the Confederacy organized a state funeral for the former president. His remains laid in state in the Hall of Congress in Richmond, covered with the flag of his country. Memorial services were held at St. Paul's Episcopal Church, followed by a procession to Hollywood Cemetery. John Tyler became the 10th President of the United States, 1841 to 1845, when President William Henry Harrison died in April 1841. He was the first vice president to succeed to the presidency after the death of his predecessor. Dubbed his accidency by his detractors, John Tyler was the first vice president to be elevated to the office of president by the death of his predecessor. Born in Virginia in 1790, he was raised believing that the Constitution must be strictly construed. He never wavered from this conviction. He attended the College of William and Mary and studied law. Serving in the House of Representatives from 1816 to 1821, Tyler voted against most nationalist legislation and opposed the Missouri Compromise. After leaving the House, he served as governor of Virginia. As a senator, he reluctantly supported Jackson for president as a choice of evils. Tyler soon joined the states' right Southerners in Congress, who banded with Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and their newly formed Whig Party opposing President Jackson. The Whigs nominated Tyler for vice president in 1840, hoping for support from Southern states' writers who could not stomach Jacksonian democracy. The slogan "Tippecanoe and Tyler too" implied flag-waving nationalism plus a dash of Southern sectionalism. Clay, intending to keep party leadership in his own hands, minimized his nationalist views temporarily. Webster proclaimed himself a Jeffersonian Democrat. But after the election, both men tried to dominate old Tippecanoe. Suddenly President Harrison was dead, and Tyler too was in the White House. At first the Whigs were not too disturbed, although Tyler insisted upon assuming the full powers of a duly elected president. He even delivered an inaugural address, but it seemed full of good Whig doctrine. Whigs, optimistic that Tyler would accept their program, soon were disillusioned. Tyler was ready to compromise on the banking question, but Clay would not budge. He would not accept Tyler's exchequer system, and Tyler vetoed Clay's bill to establish a national bank with branches in several states. A similar bank bill was passed by Congress. But again, on states' rights grounds, Tyler vetoed it. In retaliation, the Whigs expelled Tyler from their party. All the cabinet resigned but Secretary of State Webster. A year later, when Tyler vetoed a tariff bill, the first impeachment resolution against a president was introduced in the House of Representatives. A committee headed by Representative John Quincy Adams reported that the president had misused the veto power, but the resolution failed. Despite their differences, President Tyler and the Whig Congress enacted much positive legislation. The log cabin bill enabled a settler to claim 160 acres of land before it was offered publicly for sale, and later pay $1.25 an acre for it. In 1842, Tyler did sign a tariff bill protecting northern manufacturers. The Webster-Ashburton Treaty ended a Canadian boundary dispute. In 1845, Texas was annexed. The administration of the states' writer strengthened the presidency. But it also increased sectional cleavage that led toward civil war. By the end of his term, Tyler had replaced the original Whig cabinet with Southern conservatives. In 1844, Calhoun became Secretary of State. Later these men returned to the Democratic Party, committed to the preservation of states' rights, planter interests, and the institution of slavery. Whigs became more representative of Northern business and farming interests. When the first Southern states seceded in 1861, Tyler led a compromise movement. Failing, he worked to create the Southern Confederacy. He died in 1862, a member of the Confederate House of Representatives. Tyler left Washington with the conviction that the newly inaugurated President Polk had the best interest of the nation. Tyler retired to a Virginia plantation, originally named Walnut Grove, or the Grove, located on the James River in Charles City County. He renamed it Sherwood Forest, in a reference to the folk legend Robin Hood, to signify that he had been outlawed by the Whig Party. He did not take farming lightly and worked hard to maintain large yields. His neighbors, largely Whigs, appointed him to the minor office of Overseer of Roads in 1847 in an effort to mock him. To their displeasure, he treated the job seriously, frequently summoning his neighbors to provide their slaves for road work, and continuing to insist on carrying out his duties even after his neighbors asked him to stop. The former president spent his time in a manner common to Virginia's first families, with parties, visiting or being visited by other aristocrats, and spending summers at the family's seaside home, Villa Margaret. In 1852, Tyler happily rejoined the ranks of the Virginia Democratic Party and thereafter kept interested in political affairs. However, Tyler rarely received visits from his former allies and was not sought out as an advisor. Occasionally requested to deliver a public speech, Tyler spoke during the unveiling of a monument to Henry Clay. He acknowledged their political battles but spoke highly of his former colleague, whom he had always admired for bringing about the compromise tariff of 1833. Throughout his life, Tyler suffered from poor health. As he aged, he suffered more frequently from colds during the winter. On January 12, 1862, after complaining of chills and dizziness, he vomited and collapsed. Despite treatment, his health failed to improve, and he made plans to return to Sherwood Forest by the 18th. As he lay in bed the night before, he began suffocating, and Julia summoned his doctor. Just after midnight, Tyler took a sip of brandy, and told his doctor, "Doctor, I am going," to which the doctor replied, "I hope not, sir." Tyler then said, "Perhaps it is best." Tyler died in Richmond shortly thereafter, most likely due to a stroke. He was 71. Tyler's death was the only one in presidential history not to be officially recognized in Washington, because of his allegiance to the Confederate States of America. He had requested a simple burial, but Confederate President Jefferson Davis devised a grand, politically pointed funeral, painting Tyler as a hero to the new nation. Accordingly, at his funeral, the coffin of the 10th President of the United States was draped with a Confederate flag. He remains the only U.S. president ever laid to rest under a flag not of the United States. Tyler had been more loyal to Virginia and his own principles than to the Union of which he had been president. Tyler was buried in Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia, near the gravesite of President James Monroe. He has since been the namesake of several U.S. locations, including the city of Tyler, Texas, named for him because of his role in the annexation of Texas. Tyler's presidency has provoked highly divided responses among political commentators. It is generally held in low esteem by historians. Edward P. Crapola began his biography John Tyler, the Accidental President, 2006, by noting, "Other biographers and historians have argued that John Tyler was a hapless and inept chief executive whose presidency was seriously flawed." In the Republican Vision of John Tyler, 2003, Dan Monroe observed that the Tyler presidency is generally ranked as one of the least successful. Seeger wrote that Tyler was neither a great president nor a great intellectual, adding that despite a few achievements, his administration has been and must be counted an unsuccessful one by any modern measure of accomplishment. A survey of historians conducted by C-SPAN in 2021 ranked Tyler as 39th of 44 men to hold the office. In 2002, bucking the trend of historically poor evaluations of Tyler's presidency, historian Richard P. McCormick said, contrary to accepted opinion, John Tyler was a strong president. He established the precedent that the vice president, on succeeding to the presidential office, should be president. He had firm ideas on public policy, and he was disposed to use the full authority of his office. McCormick said that Tyler conducted his administration with considerable dignity and effectiveness. Tyler's assumption of complete presidential powers set a hugely important precedent, according to a biographical sketch by the University of Virginia's Miller Center of Public Affairs. Tyler's successful insistence that he was president, and not a caretaker or acting president, was a model for the succession of 7 other vice presidents: Millard Fillmore, Andrew Johnson, Chester A. Arthur, Theodore Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, Harry S. Truman, and Lyndon B. Johnson, to the presidency over the 19th and 20th centuries upon the death of the president. The propriety of Tyler's action in assuming both the title of the presidency and its full powers was legally affirmed in 1967, when it was codified in the 25th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Some scholars have praised Tyler's foreign policy. Monroe credits him with achievements like the Webster-Ashburton Treaty, which heralded the prospect of improved relations with Great Britain, and the annexation of Texas, which added millions of acres to the national domain. Crapola argued that Tyler was a stronger and more effective president than generally remembered, while Seeger wrote, "I find him to be a courageous, principled man, a fair and honest fighter for his beliefs. He was a president without a party." Author Yvonne Eland, in an update of his 2008 book Recarving Rushmore, rated all 44 U.S. presidents by the criteria of peace, prosperity, and liberty. With the finished ratings, John Tyler was ranked the best president of all time. In a History Today article, Louis Kleber wrote that Tyler brought integrity to the White House at a time when many in politics lacked it, and refused to compromise his principles to avoid the anger of his opponents. Crapola argues that Tyler's allegiance to the Confederacy overshadows much of the good he did as president. Tyler's historical reputation has yet to fully recover from that tragic decision to betray his loyalty and commitment to what he had once defined as the first great American interest, the preservation of the Union. In her book on Tyler's presidency, Norma Lois Peterson suggests that Tyler's general lack of success as president was due to external factors that would have affected whoever was in the White House. Chief among them was Henry Clay, who brooked no opposition to his grand economic vision for America. In the aftermath of Jackson's determined use of the powers of the executive branch, the Whigs wanted the president to be dominated by Congress, and Clay treated Tyler as a subordinate. Tyler resented this, leading to the conflict between the branches that dominated his presidency. Pointing to Tyler's advances in foreign policy, she deemed Tyler's presidency flawed, but not a failure. While academics have both praised and criticized Tyler, the general American public has little awareness of him. Several writers have portrayed Tyler as among the nation's most obscure presidents. As Seeger remarked, his countrymen generally remember him, if they have heard of him at all, as the rhyming end of a catchy campaign slogan. Unknown artist. Tyler fathered more children than any other American president. Thank you for watching this video.